All right, so as I mentioned to you, one of the things we're trying to do today is sort of break down silos, and one of the people who's done that way better than most is Karen Raymond. She bridges the silos between the research, the clinic, and as a patient with CAPS. So, I would like to extend a really special thank you for coming today, because for some of us, like me, it's just walking upstairs. For others, it's travelling. And for you, it's travelling, and I know that's not that easy. And so I'm not going to make it any harder by dragging my introduction on, but I'll ask you to come up and tell us about your experiences.
If you need to stand up and stretch, I won't be offended. I want you to be comfortable because it's patient time. So, my name's Karen and I have CAPS. My mutation is A439V, and that's been described in the literature as both familial cold autoinflammatory syndrome and Muckle-Wells syndrome. This is my family, and we are indeed a mixed bag of CAPS. The solid shading is for family members whose mutation has been officially confirmed by sequencing in a lab. Then with stripes are the suspected mutants, who we can infer with a good degree of confidence because the rash doesn't lie. So as of right now, we have at least 17 living family members with CAPS and only 6 on Kineret. We don't know how far back the mutation goes. I've got blank boxes as unsuspected, but we don't really know about line 2 because they're old, dead. If one of the parents in line 1 had CAPS, we could have a real can of worms here. Imagine a family like this one under roughly half of those siblings up there in line 2. There could be 50 or more of us out there. And it might seem unlikely to have this many more people in or from South Australia with CAPS, but not one of us from South Australia was ever diagnosed until 2016. And that only happened because news trickled down to us from family members from here in Melbourne, where the first diagnosis was made at the end of 2013. Treatment didn't start until 2016. Last week I found this paper, which was published earlier in the year by some doctors at the Royal Adelaide Hospital. They recognised and diagnosed CAPS in a patient who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis some 25 years ago. They've tried him on Kineret, but stopped it due to what they've described as local and systemic reactions. His mother, aunt and daughter also show CAPS symptoms, but genetic testing hasn't been pursued, and this family is not getting any treatment for their CAPS. The mutation, A439V, can of worms. As Sam said too, Kineret is the only treatment option for CAPS here in Australia. Alaris is TGA approved, but not on the PBS. One of my cousins from the family tree can only take Kineret every other day because of neutropenia. It doesn't manage her CAPS properly, but the specialist, I guess, can't or won't. The compassion program's run out, can't get Alaris for her. So what's it like living with CAPS? It's a weird, confusing mess. As long as I can remember, I have been frustrated, that's all me by the way, I've been frustrated and fascinated by my weird health, but doctors were always quick to dismiss or diminish my concerns. This is the kind of stuff they'd say. And everybody with CAPS, and probably every autoinflammatory disease gets told this stuff. I could do a whole slide on that stuff. I quickly gave up on getting any real help, and I just learned to put up and shut up. As a kid, I was flagged as having an attitude problem because I would just point blank refuse to participate in phys ed classes and sports days. I did play netball, but I had terrible pain in my knees, and I quit when I was 15 after a coach told me I ran like a grandma. Years later, as a grown-up, in 2008, I made another concerted attempt to find out what was with this rash, all these weird symptoms, and the fatigue. My dad told me I was wasting my time, but I'm an optimist, and I figured there might have been a medical discovery in the last couple of decades. So in 2008, an immunologist put me on an elimination diet that made my rash worse. The allergy prick test showed nothing, and I wasn't celiac, so I had idiopathic urticaria and was told what every other doctor has told me, completely dismissing my assertion that they don't work, to manage my rash with antihistamines. Another waste of time and money, and Dad was right. So it's not easy to explain what living with the weirdness is like, because there is a lot to it. It's inconsistently constant, and it's constantly inconsistent. My sister once described it as trying to hit a moving target, and the symptoms never show up when you're in the clinic. There is a circadian aspect. Imagine waking up every single day and just scanning your body to assess your starting pain level and trying to work out how much you can get done in your day before you crash, and you always crash. We get head pain and joint pain, but we just get skin pain. I could never get my doctors to understand that it just hurts everywhere. Some days you might have an added bonus of something else visible beyond the rash, like a fat swollen foot, just like but not gout, or a fat swollen ankle, just like but not a sprain, the old pink eye of non-infectious conjunctivitis, maybe a mouthful of ulcers, something a bit like rosacea or a weird lump in your private parts. When you're limping around, people ask what you've done to yourself, and all you can say is, I woke up like this. You'd get that same look that doctors would give you, that kind of confused disbelief. Because of that look and the unsolicited medical advice that would invariably follow, I became expert at concealing my illness. And this is common behaviour for people with CAPS. We fake being well. It's a lot easier than trying to explain it, and you know nobody can help you anyway. You wait it out, you sleep it off, and hope tomorrow's going to be a better day. Diagnosis and treatment hasn't really changed that for me. It's a lot better. I'm here, but it's not better. CAPS literature describes the rash, headaches, malaise, joint pain, conjunctivitis, and so on, but as I've just mentioned, we get general skin pain, mouth ulcers, weird lumps, think hidradenitis suppurativa. There's reflux, nausea, sweats, gastrointestinal complications, and the fatigue can be debilitating, even in what's called mild CAPS. Now for me, Kineret put an end to the rash and the evening chills and rigours and shivers. That was the next level thing that I used to call full shutdown, but I still get most of the other stuff. And when I'm flaring, my temperature goes down, not up. So that's something that you won't read in a paper. Periodic no fever syndrome, it's an A439V thing. And yes, cold exposure is a trigger, but so is sun exposure and stress, which can take many forms. For me, it's things like exercise, socialising, change of routine, public speaking. In 2016, my dad's cousin emailed him from Victoria about this genetic mutation, and he immediately emailed me, ironically on April Fool's Day. There I sat, aged 43, tears streaming down my face as I recognised myself in this disease. Finally, an answer, validation, treatment, but also lifelong dependence on doctors and no hope for a cure. It took a long and cruel 9 weeks to get that first shot of Kineret, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced. In 10 minutes, I felt the tide of pain go out. I couldn't believe it. The tide of pain that would rise over me every single day just never came. I couldn't stop body checking, and a few weeks later, I sat with my old man while he had his first shot at the age of 72, and to watch his disbelief and head shaking was just awesome. Hi, Mum. My fog lifted and I grew hungry for the science. I tried to read, what the hell was an NLRP3 knockout and how could I get some? After a few months, I found I was waking up pretty rough again, so I tried increasing the Kineret to 2 daily shots and found it managed my symptoms better. My gut inflammatory marker, fecal calprotectin, came down from 1,200 micrograms per gram to 300. In spite of the evidence, the immunologist said that my gastrointestinal bleeding was not related to my CAPS because it was a different mechanism. Different mechanism. He didn't explain what that meant. He told me he would be reducing me back to 1 daily shot, saying that increased dosing just wasn't done. When he added that I wouldn't need to take Kineret at all in summer, I knew I was in trouble. After 43 years of this, I'd hoped a diagnosis might change things, but as ever, I felt unheard and powerless, unable to effectively advocate for myself. So I did the only logical thing any person in my position would do and enrolled in a Bachelor of Biomedical Science at Adelaide University. Just me. So I did that Bachelor of Biomedical Science, and I did it with a perfect GPA. That means high distinctions in every subject. Thank you very much. It helps to have a personal motivation, a new lease on life, and supportive people around you, like my awesome sister who's here with me today, who dodged the dodgy gene, and my wonderful husband, who has lived this weirdness with me for 30 years and never doubted it. But in the background, my gut issues weren't resolved, and I had been bleeding out my backside for nearly 5 years by this point. I didn't even tell you the story about the gastroenterologist who first diagnosed me with ulcerative proctitis in 2014, before the CAPS diagnosis, who then wrote a letter to my GP describing me as a vague historian with maybe just a hemorrhoid and an anxiety disorder. I will just add here, mental health plays a big part in this condition, from the physiological and socioeconomic impacts of the disease itself to how we've been treated by members of the medical profession, and that probably needs its own whole talk. So Kineret absolutely improved things, but it was as good as it was going to get. My bleeding problem persisted, but my new gastroenterologist said they didn't like to combine biologics and wouldn't consider an anti-TNF for me while I was on Kineret, even though I'd failed some of the other colitis treatments. Then in third year uni, I had a health crisis that kind of forced the issue on the anti-TNF meds. So if you're interested, I published that case study with my current gastroenterologist. Why not? So I have CAPS. I have a biomedical science degree, but the truth is, I'm just too sick for postgrad or conventional employment. I hate even admitting that. I can't physically turn up somewhere every day. I lived for 43 years with untreated CAPS, and I am a lot more beaten up than I look. I still fake it. I'm faking it right now as I'm presently failing my second anti-TNF med, and I'm on steroids and pain meds to get me through to hopefully a third treatment. Hook me up with some anti-IL-18s later, please. I know I'm running out of options, at least until some NLRP3 inhibitors hit the market. On good days, I really enjoy reading research papers, and I'm finding I spend quite a bit of time each week corresponding with patients, discussing aspects of their disease or some episode or health crash. Because I published my case study, complete strangers from the other side of the world have reached out to me for help. CAPS and gastro problems are real. The best resource for CAPS patients, without question, is the Autoinflammatory Alliance. And the amazing women behind this US-based not-for-profit organisation, Karen Durant and Jennifer Tussaud, also run a couple of very active patient groups on Facebook. There are a few other Facebook groups for autoinflammatory patients. Malina Vetterli is another tireless advocate who runs the Swiss-based FMF and AID Global Association that Sharon's going to talk about. As far as Australia goes, there's been one sleepy little Facebook group called Periodic Fever Syndrome Australia and New Zealand, left in the care of a couple of volunteer patients/mums who, as far as I can tell, are themselves struggling to find medical help. There aren't any resources here for patients in Australia. And I'll help people where I can, but I'm limited. And I'm happier in the science. To that end, this year, I started a YouTube channel making use of my science and patient knowledge to make little videos about NLRP3 and CAPS. It's just somewhere I can upload my thoughts and maybe create a resource for other patients like me who just want to understand the mechanisms of CAPS. I'm quite interested in how each of the different mutations cause the disease, and recently I've been thinking about how some of the different mutations might affect post-translational modifications, and also whether the mutations do affect expression and/or activation in different cell types, and whether that's got something to do with the different phenotypes. Unfortunately, all I can really do is ponder and follow what you awesome scientists are doing, especially Kate, who looks after my gene. But at least now I know what an NLRP3 knockout is. All right, to the doctors, there are many people living with these conditions undiagnosed and untreated. My story is not unique, and people are still living that right now in this country. Australian doctors, present company accepted, but generally Australian doctors don't know about these autoinflammatory conditions or don't recognise them when they're looking at them or don't get how serious they can be. As I said, I spend hours every week corresponding with people in this country who approach me with frustration about the lack of understanding of their medical situations. We have a doctor-patient communication culture problem, and it continues to leave patients feeling unheard and frustrated. Rare diseases are way under the radar in this country. The Medical Journal of Australia maintains a policy of not publishing any lessons learnt from rare diseases in practice, and they've never published a thing about NLRP3 or CAPS. Australian resources are lacking. I want to thank Seth Masters, the organising committee, and the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute for making today happen, and for the guys who kicked these things off at the Garvin 5 years ago. Thanks also to you here in person and to you watching online for being part of the solution. I'm glad to see autoinflammatory diseases are on the radar also for Rare Voices Australia, because you can see we need advocacy. Doctors need education, and we need a proactive approach to find the undiagnosed and to ensure appropriate treatments can be made available. Any questions?
Karen, that was amazing, and I think
Shocking.
how demonstrated clearly how far we and you have come, but how much there still is to do. So, some questions? Anyone with some questions?
It was quite fascinating. I like the way you tell your story also. Have you known your grandparent or your parents known your grandparent and talked about those kind of symptom, and then you're like, aha, because
This is me.
yeah.
That's my dad. He's the only person I've known my whole life with CAPS. I met my cousin today. His cousin, he had known from years, before I was born, who had reached out, and it was only one of the members of our family actually married a genetic scientist. If that's not serendipity, I don't know what is. But they went to the Royal Melbourne Hospital, and there were some doctors there that actually were prepared to listen and to recognise the symptoms and who diagnosed it. And from there, it was family trickling down. But as you can see, there's a lot of families still left out of the loop. And I haven't met most of these guys, but I have a big to-do list when I get home to get them all help. I've got one in kidney failure right now who's being managed by diet. And there's another one who's lost 2 kidneys and had a transplant. And the doctors in Adelaide associate our mutation with FCAS and nothing else, and don't seem to understand, we're losing kidneys, how many do we have to lose before you see that this is a big problem and we need treatment? So, yeah, I got some work to do. And if anyone can help with advocacy, Nicole.
Kate, did you have a question as well, or Charlotte?
My question is really, how can we as a community help? What can we as a community do to sort of further the cause for patients? I doubt any of us have much sway with the PBS or anything. I certainly don't. But in terms of community groups or being or education of GPs or what are the solutions from a patient's perspective?
Yeah, it's not a 5-minute fix, but all of those things. And certainly, I don't know whether there's a lovely little intranet where all the doctors talk to each other and can just say, hey, this is a thing. But I know CAPS is one disease in many, so it is about education and awareness. I guess it's also, if you kind of know that there is a doctor that really understands these diseases, so when you go to the doctor and they laugh in your face, which they do, you can actually kind of get a doctor to talk to them, because a lot of them don't like listening to patients, and even patients with degrees sometimes don't get heard, so it helps. But if there's a go-to, what would be really great would be a rare disease clinic, for everybody to kind of funnel into, I guess, where people have got time to look into this stuff with research. Another really good thing would be to have people from PBS and TGA come to these things. and see that, you know, doctors are struggling to get access to these drugs. We don't have any weight with those organisations. They won't even talk to us. And we don't have patient bodies. So, I mean, I'm going to let Sharon talk more about the patient organisation that's being started up. But yeah, we just have to just shout from the rooftops and educate and talk to everybody. I don't have the answers.
We are running quite behind time, but let's have one more question for sure.
It's not a question. I'm the solid circle on row 4. I find that if I actually go to a new doctor, I have to take all the paperwork, my genetic results, anything that I can find on CAPS, the Kinneret brochure, and I actually have to educate that doctor before I even start talking about why I've gone to see them.
Not everyone's got time to do study and get degrees and learn.
Yeah, and that and that takes up time with your new doctor, and you find that sometimes you actually get cut short because the information about the CAPS overrides why you've actually gone to the doctor. Yep. But it's in educating. Yep.
All right, now I appreciate we've been going for a while. We have to thank Karen. Thank you very much, Karen.